Hey guys, it's your host Julian. This week we will conclude our two-parter with the great Paul Scarlata as we chat all about the regular show. Paul came onto the series fairly early, and he talks in depth about one of the greatest regular show episodes of all time, Death Punchies, and one of the funniest episodes of all time, The Unicorns Have to Go. If you haven't yet, you should check us out on Patreon. We're offering 3 tiers with a lot of fun perks. Some of those perks included in the 3 tiers are a special shout out to the patrons, question priority, early and ad-free access to the audio and video chats, voting on upcoming retrospectives, and so much more. Our first Patreon exclusive video will drop this Friday. Now, let's get on to my chat with the great Paul Scarlata. But I don't think you do. I told you the story about me and my kid bonding over this one. But if it wasn't for this show, I don't think I'm back into animation the way I am. I was kind of, just not, I don't want to say I was in a sourpuss mood, type of thing when it came to animation, but I just felt like animation wasn't made for me anymore. There's, once you get older, you realize you can stop bitching about things and you can feel like, this thing's for me or this thing isn't for me. And you can kind of go or go away from it. And this regular show, right off the bat, hooked me hook, line, and sinker. The characters were great. The stories were out there. It seemed like everybody that was working on the show was having fun because of how fun the show was. I've gotten very lucky to talk to quite a few people, from some of the artists to the art director. I got to talk to Bill Salyers, the voice of Rigby. That was fantastic. And now I'm talking to another guy, and one of the episodes, we got 4 here, ladies and gentlemen, that said stick out to you. Death Punchies, right? So whenever I'm recommending a show, I always recommend a couple episodes, and Death Punchies is up there. I absolutely love this one. This one reminded me of Napoleon Dynamite scene with Rex Kwon Do.
Yes.
So,
yes.
yeah, I don't know if that was a direct correlation or an influence for this episode, but man, walk me through Death Punchies, man. How do you get to Death Punchies?
Cool. I probably realized it at the time that it was a Napoleon Dynamite kind of reference, but I just recently watched that movie with my son a few months ago, and I was like, oh man, that's the Death of Kong. even
How
the
do your
voice.
sensei?
Yeah. And it's one of my favorites too. And like we were saying during the break, I co-wrote and storyboarded 3 episodes. And Death Punches was one of the first ones that I worked on as a storyboard revisionist, which I did for another 6 years after doing those 3 storyboards. And there's a whole bunch of things that I think about with that episode. First and foremost is the fact that Chris Riccardi. I don't know if you know Chris Riccardi.
I've never had him on, but I know he passed away not too long ago. Huge Samurai Jack influence.
Yeah, no, he's a fantastic talent and super nice guy, and he had done some rough boards for that episode that I got to clean up. The whole segment where Rigby, he's standing there with the piece of paper that's got the death punch on it, and there's the that song where you're the best around, and he's
Yeah.
figuring out it, that he's got to get the mullet and he's got to get the cut off jean shorts, and then he goes and he's testing out his death punchy powers. That was all roughed by Chris. And I remember cleaning that stuff up and doing the board revisions on that, and had a great time working on that sequence. And as a child of the 70s and the 80s, growing up outside Boston, mullets have a place in my heart.
Down here in the South, they do too. That and El Caminos.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
seriously. So yeah, same thing up suburban Massachusetts in the 70s and the 80s. So it's automatically hilarious to me, and Sam Marin, who does the voice of, he did Pops and he
Muscle
did
Man,
and Benson. He also did the voice of Death Kwang Do Sensei, and just did such a good job, and it's so funny. and I did a ton of work on that show, and the moment where it's at the end of the episode. There's a businessman standing in front of Sensei, and he's like, "Why, yes, I have the death punch and the death double." He finds out that it's stolen. And just getting to draw, Sensei shaking his fist at the heavens. Uh, yeah, just so many funny moments. Just such a hilarious episode. I really wish that I could remember, besides Chris, who the primary board artists were on that episode. But yeah, it was just a super funny episode, and one of my favorites and one of my son's favorites. He loved regular show. I don't know. I was going to show you. I've got a regular show poster here. I can show you it later. Yeah, it's just this foundational show that I really loved working on, and just we were talking about King of the Hill earlier, about having a cultural impact for particularly guys, but for people of a particular age, it had such a huge impact that so whenever I'm walking around in a t-shirt, I got my regular show t-shirt on now. If I'm walking out, in public, there's a certain age demographic guy who will see the shirt and be like, "Oh, fucking regular show, that's dope. I love that show. I grew up on that show."
The bros, man. The bros. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, I digress. But yeah, Death Punchies was a show that I really loved working on and really had a good time with.
Yeah, it's that. I told Paula Spence this. I've literally told everybody that's worked on this one. I don't know what JG's fascination was with mullets, with El Caminos, with trailer parks, with white trash, but it's like this show on paper doesn't make sense, right? Like if you try to explain to somebody what the show is, like it's it's a scrub jay, it's a raccoon, there's a abominable snowman that's voiced by Luke Skywalker, that played the Joker for a little while, and then you've got a gumball machine, and there's a dude, this muscle man that's got tits hanging down to his knees, and there's a high five ghost and he only has 4 fingers. It's just, you try to tell somebody all this and they just look at you like you've got 3 heads, and it's just like you show them. With the exception of my wife, every show or every person that I've showed this show to has fallen in love with the show. With the exception, I just don't think my wife understands comedy. If we're being completely honest when it comes to this, because it's a fucking brilliant show. I love this show. There's something about a show like this, a movie like this, or anything, right? That it's not made to change the world. It's not out here trying to do anything other than make you laugh, make you just fucking think about what you're watching for 10 minutes, 12 minutes, whatever it is. It's just a good time. It's a party on the screen every episode. I'm so appreciative that I got to find this show at a very integral part of my life. Like I said, I bonded over this show with my son. I laughed at this show so many times, and I didn't think I could laugh, or I didn't think I was able to laugh. Putting on regular show or seeing an episode of regular show, it gets me there every time. It can instantly, there's a couple things that I can point to that if I'm having a shitty day, Talladega Nights, Step Brothers, Nacho Libre, regular show, these shows I can put on, I can just laugh. No matter what happens, I can laugh at it. And I think that's a true mark of something that's everlasting. That's what's the word I'm looking for? Timeless. That's the word I'm looking for. I was thinking of Beauty and the Beast for some reason, but timeless, right? You can watch this at any era. So we talked Death Punchies just for a second, man, but let's take it a step back for just a few minutes, man. How do you get on to regular show?
That is a story I love telling, because prior to working on regular show, the previous show that I was working on was American Dad, and I remember working on American Dad, and one of my colleagues, a guy named Jansen Yee, who's a fantastically talented guy, he's still directing on American Dad. he was a Cal Arts guy, and every year at the end of the year, Cal Arts has a what they call the producers show, which is kind of like everybody's student film, and
Hmm.
it's this big show. And I've been to it a couple times, but my friend Jansen, he got his hands on the DVD of the producer show for that year, and he comes up to me. He's like, "Dude, you gotta see this short. It's so fucking funny. It's just hilarious." And it was 2 in the AM PM.
Hmm.
I'm sure you have to have seen 2 in the AM PM. And I thought it was hilarious, and I thought it was super funny, and it was my style of humor. It was Jansen's style of humor. Just really funny and inventive, and it still cracks me up to this day. And just kind of filed it in the back of my mind. And then my time on American Dad ended with the 2007-2008 writer strike. It was
Hmm.
the previous writer strike. We're in another writer strike now, but the last one kind of put us all out of work because American Dad, Family Guy, those were WGA shows, and production had to stop. We all had to stop working. But to be honest with you, at that time, I was like, fucking good. I
Yeah.
am so burnt out. I am so ready for a break. Storyboarding, particularly for TV, can be kind of a grind. And
Hmm.
I was having some health issues back then, and you know, so I was dealing with health issues, and was had been working crazy hours on American Dad. A show that I loved, and a crew that I loved. But I was just burnt out, and I needed some time off. And so when the writer strike happened, I took about a year and a half off. And after about maybe 8 to 10 months, I was like, okay, I've kind of got my health back on track. Um, Feeling better. I've kind of recharged my battery. I need to start looking for work again. And didn't particularly want to go back to American Dad at the time. I ended up going back to American Dad later on, which was a great night. It was felt like going home.
Hmm.
Uh, but at the time, I didn't want to. And we had talked earlier about having to take tests in order
Yeah.
to get a job, and that's kind of just a particularly in television and animation industry thing. You have to take a test, and sometimes those tests took you like a whole fucking week to do, and they were just a lot of work, and with absolutely no guarantee of getting a job. So
Hmm.
you spend a week doing a test, and oftentimes you just drop into this black hole and never hear anything back, positive or negative. You wouldn't get any feedback. And so I had done about 10 or 12 tests by the time I heard about regular show. And so I was fucking done with tests. I'd done
Yeah.
12 weeks worth of tests, and hadn't gotten any jobs from it. Oftentimes hadn't heard back at all from anybody. It wasn't like, oh, thank you for taking the time to do this. Nothing, which I felt was disrespectful and pissed me off. Um, and so I heard about regular show, and I was like, oh, fucking JG, 2 in the AM PM. Of course, yeah, I want to work with that guy. That guy's awesome. Whatever he's doing, I want to be a part of. And so I got the test. And so on the one hand, I was like, oh, awesome, JG. The other hand, I was like, I fucking hate tests. I don't want to do another test. So it was part writing and part storyboarding. It was this 2-part test. And so I was like, fuck it. I don't know what he wants other than the fact that I've seen his short, which I loved, which, as has, it involves drug use and, profanity and kind of psychedelic weird shit happening. And so I'm like, I'm gonna fuck it. I'm not gonna hold back. I'm just gonna do what I think is funny. And I remember writing, drug jokes and dick jokes and, all this stuff that I never would have done otherwise.
Yeah.
Uh, and I remember some of the the drawings that I did, I can't remember what the prompt was, but it was like Mordecai and Rigby see something that tripped them out or something like that. And so I drew like this giant dick on horseback with a this like evil horse rearing up with flames coming out of its nostrils, and he's got this flaming sword, and like all this crazy off the wall shit. I'm like, they're not gonna go for this shit. This is gonna be like everything else. I'm gonna drop into a black hole. I'm never gonna hear back.
JG's
And
like, hire this guy now.
I got a call like a month later, and they're like, and I hear his voice, and of course, regular show wasn't happening, but I was like, oh, that's the voice of the character in 2 in the AM/PM. And he's like, dude, yeah, I really like your test. I'm like, oh no shit, you like the you like all the shit I did for the test. And he's like, yeah, we want to talk to you. And so I got to meet him and Mike Roth, who was
Mhm.
kind of like his number 2 at the time. And Mike is I don't think Mike gets enough credit,
Yeah.
for JG is an incredible talent, super funny, and has such a distinct voice. But Mike was really, I think, a real creative voice behind the scenes, which gave a lot to, especially early regular show, like the first couple seasons. He was a real,
His Greg Daniels.
yeah, he was so good and so funny, and so I got to meet with those guys, and and we met at a restaurant down the street from Cartoon Network, and they were like, "Oh yeah, some of the shit you did cracked us up," and we couldn't believe it, and I was like, "Oh good," because I didn't know if I was going to offend you or you're going to think it was unfunny or whatever. So I was really pleased that they went for it. And so I started to work on that show, and I also was really happy because it was this an outline board driven show. So as a storyboard artist, you're a writer as well as a storyboard artist. So I was really excited to be involved in the writing process, and it ended up, that I wasn't kind of, feeling the voice of the show. And so there were, after the 3 episodes, they're like, we really like you. We like the work that you do. You're not quite nailing the voice we're looking for, but do you want to stay on as a board revision? So like, yeah, I want to be part of the show, and I'm glad that you want to keep me on. And so I ended up working for 6.5 years on the show, from the very beginning to just about the very end. In those early days, I got to co-write 3 episodes with Kat Morris, who was my first board partner, who was super talented. She was fresh out of school, out of what's that New York school? I'm terrible with names, but I'm blanking on the name. Anyway, she went to school in New York, and she did some short films that were really cool and was really talented. And in the beginning, we got to sit in on the writing meetings, and the writing meetings were so cool and so much fun. And you mentioned Matt Price before. Matt Price was one of the writers. There was one other guy at the time.
Calvin Wong.
No, Calvin came a little bit later, and he was never one of the. He was one of the board artists and co-writers, but he wasn't one of the 2 staff writers.
Was it John Infantino?
Infantino, no, he ended up being like kind of like an animation supervisor, which I think Calvin ended up doing later on too. And of course, I have a black hole Swiss cheese brain for names. I can't remember, but yeah, Matt was one of the guys. But anyway, we would get into a room, and this was one of the most creatively fulfilling and fun jobs that I've ever had in animation, is being part of those writers meetings in regular show. And what we would do is we would play writers games, and I'm not sure if anybody had talked to you about the writers games that we would do.
No.
But the way that it would work is we would all sit around a table, and we would get a legal size paper, the 11 by or 8.5 by 14, and we would fold it up into 4s. So it would have 4 horizontal columns, and we would sometimes we would have a word in a hat, like they would write a word, like an emotion or something like that would be in the hat, and you would choose that. And or it would just be like, draw Mordecai and Rigby in that top column, doing whatever, or based on this word prompt that we get. And so we would spend, a minute or 5 minutes or whatever the time period would be doing that drawing or whatever, whatever we want to do, Mordecai and Rigby doing. And then it'd be like, okay, pass it to two persons to your right. And so the drawing that I did would get passed to somebody else. I would get somebody else's drawing. And they're like, okay, in the next 5 minutes, write act one based on, so we had 5 minutes to come up with act
That's
one.
crazy.
And it was super fun. And it was, sometimes you'd end up with nonsensical stuff. Sometimes you'd come away with a little germ of an idea that was really cool, and then other times you just get this fantastic bonkers story from beginning to end. And it was so much fun. Act one, you set up the story, you set up the conflict. Act two, they're trying to solve the conflict and in escalating ways, and then act three, they resolve the conflict and come to the conclusion. And it was always just a lot of fun writing those stories and being part of that and coming up with cool stories, and seeing some germ of an idea that you came up with end up being in an episode later on. And we as storyboard artists were part of that for like the first, I don't know how many seasons, but they eventually phased it out, and it was just the two staff writers, JG, Mike, and I think like Chris Riccardi, who came in, and then later on John Infantino and Calvin Wong, the core top guys were the only ones who ended up participating in those meetings later on. But in the beginning, all the storyboard artists were part of it, and they were just so much fun and really cool, and a really cool way of coming up with stories. Just this kind of put on the spot brainstorming sessions that were just really creative and really a lot of fun. That was an early core memory of being a part of that show and doing something completely new and different. Because on the previous shows that I'd worked on Family Guy, American Dad, and King and Hill at that point. And those were all script driven shows where we would be handed the script and we would have no involvement in the stories whatsoever. And coming onto the show where you were responsible for writing and had such a big part in the creation of those episodes, from the writing to the dialogue to doing the storyboards, you were just such a core part of the creation of that show from top to bottom, or that episode from top to bottom. And we would do pitch meetings too, where we would after we would get our outline, which is usually like somewhere between a page and a half, you and your writing partner, your storyboard partner, would get together. You would write all the dialogue. You kind of flesh out the story holes, or flesh out the story a little bit more, and then you would thumbnail the whole thing. And then we would do all the thumbnails on Post-it notes. And JG liked that because for each pitch session, we would put our thumbnail storyboard up on these giant pieces of foam core. And JG liked to be able to take the Post-its off and shuffle it around if he wanted to, change the story up. And those pitch meetings were a lot of fun too, because we had to, pitch our stories and then be involved in the rewriting or the brainstorming of the thing after the fact. So all of that was new to me, and being involved in story on that level was just super fun, and that I just really enjoyed. And I really loved the, Cartoon Network. Most of the shows at the time had that model where they were board driven and outline driven. Like Adventure Time was like that. Steven Universe was like that. Whole bunch of other shows used that model, and had just such talented, funny people working on it.
I can imagine. Oh, no, you're perfectly fine. I got to imagine it stretched a muscle too that you haven't been able to use since coming into the industry. So it made you a more well-rounded, and it made you look at it probably made you a better artist at the end of the day, because it made you look at things that you probably wouldn't have thought about. Because most of the time, like you were saying, you get a script, it kind of got everything mapped out. But if you're having to come up with, how did they get here? How do they get out of here? What do you do to get them to here? Kind of makes you think, so it's a great exercise. And that's the first time I've ever heard of just anybody talking about like you guys would do these. That's so fucking smart. Like, do you know who came up with that? That you start here and then you pass it down and somebody finishes it.
I think that's it's a writer's game that is fairly common in writers' rooms, from what I understand. But
Hmm.
I think that JG learned it at Cal Arts.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure if I'm not mistaken. So that was something that he took from his time there and brought into
Mm.
his time on regular show. But it was like you said, it was just I was working parts of my brain that I hadn't worked before, and I had always loved writing. Write my spare time. I and just recently have really dived into writing. But really learning about how three act structure works,
Yeah.
how that kind of storytelling works. That was all new to me. So that was something that I learned about and really enjoyed on regular show. Um, we talked earlier about my foundational time on King of the Hill and what I learned there. What I learned on regular show um, was all that story stuff, all that writing stuff, and also how, like, um, after my time on King of the Hill, I spent 4 years working on Seth MacFarlane shows.
Hmm.
And Seth MacFarlane shows, as you probably know, the characters are all they're very stiff. The acting was like, they do like this. That's
Yeah.
like the extent of their acting. And the characters are always in three-quarter and the stiff poses. And so I'd done that for 4 years, and then I come on a regular show, and these are characters that have they're rubber hose
Yeah.
arms and legs and stuff, and they have volume, but they're very loose and
Animated.
they're very very animated. And so I came onto the show, and I was drawing, just as stiffly as I was on the McFarlane shows on Family Guy and American Dad. And JJ's like, "You're too stiff, man. It's too stiff. You got to loosen up. Just do it, man." And so over time, I was able to loosen up and really kind of get that kind of loose, energetic line back. And I really loved being able to loosen up my hand like that, and really,
Yeah.
give these characters some life and animate these characters. And JG was very patient with me and letting me work that out of my system and kind of get up to speed with the way he liked to have these characters drawn. And so I learned a lot in that respect as well.
Yeah, man, it's like I said, I just think that's a brilliant technique to do. I mean, you hear about all the time. You hear about, schools people go to, and it's very rarely do you see like I don't know about you, but like when I was going through college, I don't say college the first time because it was college the entire time. I started out, when I was in the military, I was told that, I'd have to find some kind of job that wouldn't have me doing what I do now, standing a whole bunch, being very physical. They told me I'd probably do some desk job because of how bad my back was.
Yeah,
And then I'm sitting in class. I just got done listening to Kevin Smith's podcast, and he essentially surmised it to, if you're not doing what you love, man, what the fuck are you waiting for? Life's too short, because it was right after he had his heart attack
yeah,
and almost died. And I'm sitting in class, and I'm sitting in my English class, or I'm not, excuse me, not in my English class. My English class is my next class, but I'm sitting in a computer class, and I've got my books open, and I don't have any interest in computers. Like I was telling you earlier with my wife, like she loves like building stuff and fixing stuff in the house. Like I don't have any hardware to retain any of that. If I don't like something, it's just boom, boom, it's gone. I don't think about it ever again.
yeah,
And all I've wanted to do since I was 12 was cook for a living. And I'm sitting here in this class and I'm listening to this person talk about Linux servers or software or some shit like that. I don't even know. And I'm
yeah,
just like, dude, I don't want to be here right now. So I'm like getting up and I'm closing my books, and the teacher goes, and it was a nice teacher, and I feel bad. I felt bad for after it, and I went and apologized since then to that teacher. But I remember the teacher going like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, I'm just gonna leave. Like, well, I'm gonna mark you. You're only here for the first 5 minutes. You got to kind of stay for at least a half an hour. And I'm like, nah, not if you don't want to do this shit for a living. And then he was like, well, with that kind of attitude, you're not gonna get any far. I'm like, well, with this kind of attitude, I'm not gonna be in fucking computers anymore anyways. So I'm leaving. Bye. I'm like, well, what are you gonna do? And I was like, I'm gonna go over to the culinary school because that's what I really want to do. And like I said, since then I've went back and apologized for interrupting the class and everything, like, because I thought that was extremely rude. I didn't try to be, but I'm very anti-authority type of thing. Like you said, I had to deal with the shit for 7 years, man. Tell me what to do, when to do it, how to shit, how to sit, all that
Yeah,
stuff. And I just didn't like it once it became a civilian. So,
sure.
but yeah, I think it's very intelligent because the whole reason I brought that up is because there's so many things in college that I just completely threw away. I wasn't paying attention, didn't give a shit. For him to have the foresight, be like, oh, this was an exercise we did in school, and this really got the creative juices flowing. I just think that's just telling of the guy that JG is, and the guy that JG will be when it's all said and done. When he's done animating, when he hangs his, or when he sharpens his last pencil, or stretches his finger for the last time for using his iPads, his computers, and everything. I think, like I said, I think that's a very intelligent way to keep your staff on, not on edge on a bad way, but just like I said, those creative juices flowing.
Yeah.
You gave me a list of 3 episodes that you really enjoyed working on, that you co-wrote and boarded on. We got Unicorns, Free Cake, and Appreciation Day, man. Out of these 3, Free Cake hands down stands out the most to me,
Yeah.
because this is the one that I saw on constant rotation in Cartoon Network, but it's also one that really, I've never been a chocolate cake kind of guy, but this one really made me want chocolate cake. So I had to hit pause and go up to the local what are they called? Fucking grocery store, to get a slice of chocolate cake when I saw this one, man. But Free Cake, let's start there.
Yeah.
Free Cake, how does this one come about? Is this one of those exercise type of things that you guys were doing, or?
I'm pretty sure the germ of the idea came from the writers' games, but I don't specifically remember that moment. I do remember Free Cake was the second episode that I worked on. We'd done the unicorns was the first one that I worked on. And as you were talking about watching it again, it made me think of a time, so maybe a couple of years ago, when my son was just getting into regular show, and he had a couple friends over, and I think that their mom had dropped them off and had just come in at the end of the episode where they're with the babies, with the what are they, the
The
Lord
Guardians, or
Guardian.
yeah.
Yeah, and there's the moment where Skips shrivels and he gets on his hands and knees, and he's got his tits are hanging down, and the mom is like, "What are you guys watching?"
Don't worry, I worked on this.
Yeah. It's
I'm a
all cool.
professional.
Yeah. I made this. Yeah. Um, but it was a lot of fun working on that episode, and I remember working with Kat closely on that, and I remember the jam sessions with JG and Mike as well. And I remember the moment where I'm pretty sure it was Mike was like, what if at the end, the babies just take the cake and like smear it on their faces,
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that's it. That's how we got to end this episode. And and, and a particular memory of that's the first time we see Gary.
Yeah.
The David Bowie,
Yeah.
character, the Ziggy Stardust, where he drives the El Camino.
Mhm.
Speaking of El Caminos, and I remember us jamming on that, and I specifically remember Mike was the guy who did the initial drawing of Gary, just kind of whipped it out and said, "Oh yeah, he's got to drive an El Camino," and it was so funny, because like I said, mullets and El Caminos, they're just funny.
Second nature.
Yeah, exactly. And they're very close to my heart and my history and my past. Um, so I remember those moments, jamming with everybody. I think we were working pretty late that one particular night, trying to work out the story after Kat and I had our first pass on it. But doing all those drawings of of the guys, like the beginning where I think it was in the beginning where they Rigby finds the plate and thinks it's cool, and we got to put the cake on it, and yeah, when we start talking about these episodes, all those memories of working on it come back to me, and like, oh yeah, that working with Kat, in our office, working with JG and Mike and Kat all together, where we're jamming just in a room, doing doodles and stuff and coming up with silly shit and having a good time, and just some of that stuff just came out of nowhere. Like
Yeah.
Gary came out of nowhere, and the baby smearing the cake came out of nowhere, and and then you think back, and it was just somebody's brainstorm idea at the moment where we were just entertaining ourselves, and just coming up with what we thought was funny, and then having it make it into the show, and then have it be these iconic moments that I remember, that people remember, and just really
Hmm.
define those episodes. It was really a lot of fun.
You got a favorite? You got a favorite moment from this episode?
um, I think it was the appearance of Gary,
Yeah.
when he swoops down in his El Camino and just materializes in front of and I was thinking about it when you were when I was listening to the Paula Spence episode that you did, and you guys were talking about it and trying to remember his name, and I was like,
Hmm.
oh, Gary, it's Gary. And there's a moment where Gary's says he's got to take Skips, and Skips is like, Gary, you don't have to do this. And I remember the moment where we were hanging out and jamming on this, and I'm pretty sure this was Mike again too. I can't remember if it was Mike or JG, but I'm pretty sure it was Mike. Like, what if his name is just Gary? Like he's he's just Gary, and Skips knows this guy, and they have a history together, and so he says, Gary, you don't have to do this. And there was just this kind of throwaway thing that ended up, ballooning into a recurring character,
Hmm.
further down the line, and so it's funny, those little moments can just be these off the cuff things that turn it into a bigger thing. It's super funny. So I remember that moment.
It'd be interesting to take a look at anything that was ever created when it comes to animation in particular, since it's an animation podcast or a pop culture podcast, excuse me. But just to see what from each show, was there from the beginning in Inception. So you had Fred Flintstone and Wilma Flintstone, right? And then for some reason, somebody was like, "Oh man, it'd be cool if we did a purple dinosaur." Just somebody throwing it out there in one of those little writer sessions. Then
Yeah,
Dino's born, and you're like, "Yeah, but he needs a friend." So you got, I don't know, fucking Barney, and then yeah, but Barney kind of needs. He looks like he needs one of those Aboriginal kids. He needs those kids that are wild and shit that you can't tame them down. So let's throw
yeah,
Bam Bam in there. So it's crazy to see like all of these little kernels just keep getting thrown out, and then eventually they pop and they turn into popcorn, man, and then they
yeah,
start messing around with each other in the bowl. So I really enjoy seeing things that just have out of spontaneity, right? Just are breathe into life or breathe into existence, birthed into
yeah, yeah,
existence, whatever that might be, and that
yeah,
Gary being one of those characters, man.
yeah,
I actually love because you don't really for to a certain extent that Skips has obviously he's from this magical background, all this weird woo woo shit. So I like in the later of the seasons or the later in the series, excuse me, where you see why he gets his name Skips. He's
yeah.
went to school with all of these guys, the Guardians, Gary, Death, and all these other crazy shit happening. So
Yep.
I like seeing how like I said, a kernel of a story is planted or a seed of a story is planted, and then fucking seasons down the road, shit's built into fruition.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
with
that was a great
with
episode. Calvin did a lot of, like, he was one of the guys on that particular episode, and that's
Yeah.
one of my favorites as well.
Mhm.
That was really great. And just as a quick aside story, when you were mentioning a kernel of an idea, it made me think of the time when JG was like, "What if Benson has rage issues?" Like he just kind of threw it out there. He's like, I think it would just be really funny if he had anger issues. That's the genesis of a core aspect of Benson's character that
Yeah.
that carried through the entire show. And it was just that kind of off the cuff thing that he was like, I just think it would be funny
Well,
if he had rage issues.
I have to agree, man. I think it is really funny. And one thing that I absolutely love, like I said, I love backgrounds, I love color. The
Yeah,
fact that his entire body changes, not just like his physical appearance, but the color that he uses, like the gumballs change, like everything changes. It changes to a soft red and sometimes a full-on red,
yeah,
to really put a color behind an emotion, green with envy and red with rage.
Yeah.
So I thought that's really cool, really smart too. I mean, there's not one of these characters that I don't love. It's the same thing with King of the Hill when we were talking. It's just it's hard to hate on any of these characters. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a toss up. I've always thought Mordecai was the coolest, but I fucking love Rigby. We all have that friend from the first time you see these guys on the Cartoon Network pilot pile driving a knockoff brand of Hulk Hogan's, anytime Rigby got thrown into a wall, yeah, the Macho Man Randy Savage elbow, Rigby getting thrown into a wall, just how he interacts with the world when he's when he's being used as a tool of destruction, it's every one of these characters has a moment to shine. Every one of these characters has qualities you don't like about him, but eventually they are redeemable, whether it's that episode later in that season, maybe even later in the series.
Yeah.
Every character has a redemption arc to an extent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't hate, I just disliked Muscle Man until I got Muscle Man, right?
Oh
Like the
yeah.
first couple episodes, I'm like, dude, this guy's a bro. He's a douche. It's just like he's like he's the epitome of brodom. And, to an extent, you can kind of not like somebody like that. And then you go like, oh, I get it now, right? It's just he's the butt of the joke. He's just a fun character. Like I said, I love all these characters, man. Speaking of characters, before we get into one of the next episodes, man, what were some of the characters that were easy to get into, and what were some of the characters that were a little bit more difficult to get into?
Um, like you were saying, I kind of liked all the characters and really
Mm,
enjoyed finding my way into both um, animating the characters, but also just finding a way to draw them. And
yeah.
that's another cool thing about Cartoon Network is just the idiosyncrasies that each individual artist was allowed to bring to um, I will notice it in regular show, like, oh, that's a Calvin drawing for sure,
Hmm.
or that's a Cat Morris drawing, or that's a Hillary drawing, or that's a Sean Zealous drawing. um I think you can notice it maybe a little bit more in Adventure Time, where the artist had such a visual language, in a way that they drew the characters that were specific to each individual artist. But I just love drawing all the characters. Like I said, even if Rigby was a dick sometimes, he would be redeemed by the end of the episode. Whether it was that death punchies, or in the movie, where he's a dick to Mordecai and keeps him from going to college, but in the end you can empathize with him. I just had such a great time drawing all those characters, and like I said, once I started to be able to loosen up and draw the characters, I really enjoyed them. Um, Loved Mordecai, loved Rigby, but I particularly loved Skips and Muscle Man. Like
Yeah.
I just always thought Muscle Man was hilarious. I mean, in the beginning he was, like you said, he was a little bit different, and he kind of came into his own as he
Hmm.
went along. But even the broishness cracked me up, because they're like, oh, I knew guys like that, like
Yeah.
the guys doing the donuts, and woo,
Woo!
yeah. Uh, and of course, props again to Sam Marin, who just did such a fucking great job with Muscle Man and Pops and Benson. Benson's rage. He was
Hmm.
Sam was so, especially if you know Sam. Sam's is like the sweet, soft-spoken dude, but when he gets into those characters, he goes for it, and he's
Yeah.
so good. Um, I remember when I was first drawing Skips. I love drawing. I love drawing all of his shapes and stuff. But I remember in the beginning, Skips. He's got his nipples, right? And for some reason, it just cracked me up to draw Skips with these like super, like pokey, perky nipples.
Yeah.